Hello and welcome to the first of an 8-part series where I go through each episode of the Percy Jackson TV show on Disney Plus and break down every single difference I could find between it and the book. Similar to how Movie Flame did with Harry Potter, except I will try my best not to input my bias on whether I think a change is better or worse, but obviously I'm human. I also won't be going over any of the character descriptions mentioned in the book and how they're translated to the screen, because I think this topic has been overblown when it comes to this show, and I don't want to add on to any of that. Also, I won't be going over shot-for-shot details from the book and the show, just mainly what's different and some things that are also the same. Please support the original content, the books from Rick Riordan, and the show on Disney Plus. So, with that being said, let's get on with the video. The first episode, titled, I Accidentally Vaporized My Pre-Algebra Teacher, is the same as the title of the first chapter. Same with the first line of both the show and the book being the iconic,
Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood.
And then Percy's voiceover explaining to the audience,
Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary.
This is all being taken straight from the pages of the book, just shortened and changed for TV. And then we get into Percy's introduction. Again, word for word from the book, as he says,
My name is Percy Jackson. I'm 12 years old. Am I a troubled kid?
This first page of the book is just copy-pasted right onto the script. Little changes here and there for TV. After this, we get into a few differences. As in the show, we see second grade Percy on the roof of a school because he saw an all-black Pegasus. Percy talking to a counselor about it, and it happening again, this time seeing a mechanical bull walking on the street, then changing to a garbage truck. We see Percy make doodles of the things he sees. All of this is not mentioned in the book. In the book, we're told about the upcoming field trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Arts and Percy's previous misadventures on school field trips, accidentally firing a Revolutionary War cannon at the school bus, and accidentally hitting a lever on the catwalk, sending the class into the Marine World shark pool. Next, in both, we get introduced to Grover. In the book, this introduction happens on the bus, while in the show, it happens in the cafeteria. And in the show, Grover and Percy are playing Mythomagic, although not played by Percy and Grover at Yancey Academy, is introduced in the third book, The Titan's Curse. In both Grover introduction scenes, he's being bullied by Nancy Bobofet. In the show, she hits Grover over the head with her book bag, and in the book, they're on the bus, and she is throwing pieces of peanut butter and ketchup sandwiches at the back of his head. This is when, in the book, Percy tells Grover that he's going to kill her, and starts to get up before Grover stops him, reminding him that he's on academic probation. Show Percy says he's able to talk about the things that he sees with Grover, and it makes it easier to think of them as imaginary. There's no mention of this in the book. So now we get to the museum. As we listen to Mr. Brunner lead the tour, in the book they gather around a stele, or a big grave marker, and in the show, they are by a statue of Perseus holding Medusa's head. In the book, Percy gets called on to answer one of Mr. Brunner's questions about why Kronos was eating his kids in the painting nearby. This doesn't happen in the show. In the show, they just have a workbook to do. Also in the show, we get a flashback sequence of young Percy and his mother looking at the same statue of Perseus. However, this flashback is not included in the book. When Percy gets broken out of the flashback, we get Nancy Bobofet picking on him verbally, which in the book happened while Percy was answering Mr. Brunner's question earlier. However, in both book and the show, Mr. Brunner stands up for Percy. During this, we see Miss Dodds for the first time here in the show. In the book, she's introduced earlier when they first entered the museum. Then we get to Mr. Brunner's little side chat with Percy. In the books, he explains how his studies will apply to real life, and in the show, Mr. Brunner tells Percy that the gods have something in store for him. The big difference here being that in the show, Mr. Brunner gives Percy the pen/sword Riptide. In the book, he doesn't get this till later. We then go outside, where in both instances, it looks like a storm is brewing. And in both, of course, Percy and Grover are sitting on a fountain. In the show, this is when Percy threatens Nancy, and Grover tells him not to, which in the book happened earlier on the bus. In the book, Nancy dumps her half-eaten lunch on Grover's lap, while in the show, she throws a slice of American cheese at his face. In both, she says that smug, oops, and with Boba Fett in the fountain, she yells out, "Percy pushed me!" Identical scenes in both. Next is the fight with Mrs. Dodds. So in the show, Percy already has the pen, and it vibrates before the attack. Also, Miss Dodds attacks Percy right after Nancy goes into the fountain, in front of everybody outside. In the book, Miss Dodds stops to make sure Nancy is okay, then goes up to Percy, but doesn't attack him. She grabs him and brings him back into the museum. Also worth mentioning here is that Book Grover tries to take the blame for pushing Nancy. Then, in the museum, Mrs. Dodds attacks Percy. When Mr. Brunner shows up, throws Percy the pen, he uncaps it, dodges Miss Dodds' talons, and swings the sword. Some similarities are the way Miss Dodds materializes to the scene, and the transformation is spot on, with the leather jacket turning into wings. Then, after the attack in the show, everybody is around Percy, whereas in the books he's alone. Not even Mr. Brunner was there. Then in both, he is made out to believe he imagined the whole thing, with a replacement teacher who in the book is named Mrs. Kerr, and that there's nobody named Miss Dodds at Yancey Academy. So in the show, Percy gets expelled for pushing Nancy into the fountain, and Grover tells the headmaster he saw him do it, and tells him about the threats. Oh, hi, Uncle Rick. This varies greatly from the book, in which Percy finishes the school year at Yancey, overhears Mr. Brunner and Grover talking about Percy and Kindlywoods, and Percy isn't invited back when he calls the math teacher an old sod. He also studies really hard on his Greek final with Mr. Brunner after what he had said in the museum. On his last day of school in the show, Mr. Brunner talks to him, telling him it's for the best. This actually happens on his second to last day in the book, which would have been at the end of the school year. Also, there's no real time skip between Percy being expelled and them going to camp in the show, so I assume this next part of the show is taking place during May and not June, even though the summer solstice is still the deadline and only a week away. Unless those days are being spent at camp before the deadline, or the show starts later than the books. Okay, sorry for that little rant, but we'll get through it. Then in the show, Percy just gets on the bus and goes home. Much different than in the book, as he asks Grover about the kindly ones. Grover gets scared and doesn't let Percy leave alone, and then their bus breaks down, where Percy sees the three fates cut the string, and Grover freaks out even more. Grover also gives Percy his card, if he ever needs to call him. Then in the book, Percy ditches Grover at the bus station, and this is all cut from the show. So also in the book, we get a little backstory about Percy's mom, how her parents had died in a plane crash when she was 5, raised by an uncle who didn't care for her, and how she wanted to be a writer, but had to quit school when said uncle got cancer.
There's also a little bit about Percy's dad, and his thoughts on Smelly Gabe as well.
Then when Percy gets home, in the book he walks into Gabe and his friends playing poker, whereas in the show he greets a handyman just walking out and enters into Gabe alone. Gabe, depicted very similarly in both, not having a job, drinking, eating crap snacks. Although in the book, Gabe asks Percy for money and threatens to beat his lights out if he doesn't give it to him, which in the show, Gabe does not do. Then, in the book, Gabe brings up Percy's report card, whereas in the show, Gabe answers Sally's phone and found out he got in a fight. We then get the scene with Sally where in both she gives Percy blue candy and she asks about what happened. In the book, Percy says nothing's been happening. But in the show, he opens up a little bit more about not feeling normal and about things getting worse. She also asks about Grover tattling on him, which didn't happen in the book. Sally then tells Gabe that they're going to Montauk with the car, to which he is argumentative, very similar in both, mentioning the money coming from Sally's clothes budget, and in the show, Gabe wants a sandwich, while in the book, Gabe wants some bean dip. All very similar dialogues happening here, just being adapted for TV. The difference being that in the show, Gabe ends up saying please and being polite asking for a sandwich, while in the book, Sally ends up telling Percy to apologizing for interrupting Gabe's poker game, which he does. In the show, Gabe tells Percy to take his shoes off in the car, which is different than the book. He tells him not to scratch it. Then the show gives us a dream sequence before they get to the cabin, with Percy on the beach of Montauk with some scary figure and voice talking to him. I'll come back to this in a minute. The book, On the Way to Montauk, explains to us the blue food thing, how Gabe told Sally there was no such thing, and they had a fight about it, so now she goes out of the way to get blue food whenever she can.
So now, we go to the cabin.
In the book, they roast marshmallows and Sally tells childhood stories. In the show, they only talk about roasting marshmallows. In the book, Percy eventually gets up the nerve to ask about his father and how old he was when he left. Sally tells him that he had to leave on an important journey before he was born, although Percy does have faint memories of his glow and aura. In the show, this is replaced with Percy asking about the stuff he sees, which then goes into his mom, explaining that his dad is a god and that he is a half-blood. In the book, Percy doesn't find this out until he's at camp. In both, though, Percy expresses not feeling normal to his mom. Also in the book, we do get mention of Percy seeing a Cyclops in the 3rd grade during this conversation with his mom. And in contrast to the show, in the book, Sally just tells him about the summer camp that his dad wanted to go to and how she's been trying to keep him close. She really keeps the information from him.
Next, in the book, Percy goes to sleep at the cabin. This is when we get the dream sequence. And in the book, he sees a white horse and a golden eagle fighting near the shore. Then Percy wakes up to a thunderclap and Grover coming into the cabin with his hooves out. This lines us back up with the show, one difference being, in the book, this is when Sally asks about what happened exactly at school. But in the show, she already knows about Miss Dodds before Grover gets there. Also worth mentioning that in the book, Sally didn't know Grover was coming to the cabin, while in the show, she knew, but he is early. In the show, when Grover gets to the cabin, Percy doesn't want to see him because he had snitched. This isn't a thing in the books. Percy was mostly just in shock at seeing Grover's uncovered goat legs, while Grover had hurried them to the car. So in the car, we get Grover explaining how he's Percy's protector, that he's a satyr, and an explanation about Miss Dodds and why Percy was lied to. It's the same in both the book and the show. The difference being that in the show, Grover first mentions the camp in the car, where we get this explanation at the cabin from Percy's mom in the book. Also in this scene, Grover mentions being 24. This is different than the book, where it's later revealed that Grover is 28.
So now on to the Minotaur. So in the book, the Minotaur is in front of them in the road, where they have to swerve out of the way. It then chases them and flips the car over. This is changed to be a longer sequence in the show, with the Minotaur chasing them the whole way, getting a horn into the driver's side window, and having to dodge incoming traffic before the car flips over.
Also mentioned in the book is that the car was struck by lightning.
Some more differences being that in the book, Grover passes out after the crash, and also in the book, they don't say the name of the Minotaur because names have power. In both, the car ends up in a ditch near Half-Blood Hill, and Sally explains to Percy that he will be safe at camp and that she can't go, with the show giving us a much more heartfelt goodbye. Then in both, Sally sacrifices herself to the Minotaur and turns to a gold shimmering form. Then, in the book, Percy takes off his coat to distract the Minotaur from Grover, who is still passed out nearby. This is different than in the show, where Sally is the one that takes Percy's coat to distract the Minotaur. Then, the Minotaur rushes at Percy, he jumps on its back and snaps off the horn.
The main difference being that in the show, Percy uses the sword at first, which he doesn't have yet in the book. And while on top of the monster, Percy stabs the Minotaur with its horn. In the book, Percy does this into the monster's side when it's charging, but very similar nonetheless. Especially in tone, I noticed, and the way Percy is described building up his courage after witnessing his mother's passing is very similar.
And then the episode ends with Annabeth and Chiron talking over Percy, who is still slightly conscious, same as the book, and we get the same line from Annabeth saying that he's the one. And that'll be it for episode 1. Thank you for watching. Please leave any helpful feedback in the comments below. If you enjoyed, click the like. If you want to see episode 2, subscribe, or click through if it's already out. Thank you very much.